Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, the first in a three-part series about transport futures that is sponsored by SYSTRA. The question we are facing today is what next for transport modeling? And this question allows us to approach the challenge in two ways. One is, what are the new questions that we need to address with our models? The second, of course, is what are the opportunities to address these with new modeling techniques? Now, this is not a new question. I'm a bit longer in the tooth than many of you, and I would say that this future of modeling comes up at least every 10 years. And in the 40 years that I've been involved with modeling, I would say that we have made progress and that we actually have made substantial improvements to the models that we use today. It's easy to forget. The multimodal studies in the early noughties vastly increased our professional capabilities and led to GOMS, the Guidance on Modeling for Multimodal Studies, which in the end has morphed to TAG. And those of you that grew up in the post-TAG era can't begin to imagine what Wild West existed before we had such guidance in place. Of course, I'm exaggerating a bit here. But having said that we've made improvements, I'm not sure if we've made many improvements in the way that our models are used by others and that the way in which we as modelers are perceived by our less geeky colleagues. So I'd better introduce myself. I'm Tom van Vuren. I'm head of digital transport at AMI. I'm a visiting professor at the University of Leeds and I'm chair of Modeling World. I'm also chairing this session, which basically means keeping everybody to time, ensuring we deal with as many questions that you want to ask as possible. And just to make sure you're using the right channels, we've got a Q&A channel where you should pose your questions to the panel. And we've got a chat channel for you to chat amongst yourselves. And yeah, please do so. I find these chats often the most useful, enjoyable, and fruitful parts of events such as this. Now, you know, I love modeling, and you might expect me to say that any improvement in modeling that we can make must be a good thing. We've often been beaten by cynics who say that our models don't represent reality at all. But today I'm going to be a little bit more provocative. I'm going to take the position that unless new model forms can actually provide us with better answers, and we can talk about what better means in this case, is there really any reason for us to make our models more complex, more opaque, less easy to understand, and inevitably more time consuming and more expensive? We all encounter decisions that have been made without actually referencing the modeling work that we've done to try and support that. So better models should always be preferable, but sacrificing simplicity for longer runtimes, outputs we can't explain, will not help end users, particularly when we're looking at modeling long-term futures as we do in appraisals, or if we're modeling some unknown technology future, such as a world of autonomous vehicles. And I think our challenge almost feels like the difference that Erica Thompson makes in her book Escape from Model Land, and I hope you've all got a copy on your bookshelf. There are problems such as tomorrow's weather that benefit from a better representation of reality today. However, the further we look into the future, the less certain we are about model inputs, so that any more detail in the way in which we model things may lead to what actually is only false precision. So before we move on to the speakers, I think I've got to introduce an event that's going to happen in a month's time. Yeah, there it is, Modeling World, favorite day of the year for many of us. Now, Robin Lovelace is organizing the final plenary in this event, and he's asked us to promote as you can see, a survey that he's set up to actually gauge our professional views on new ways of working for a new generation of transport modelers. So there's a QR code. There's also a link in the chat. So please take part. We can only make the event better if that was even possible. Introducing the speakers. We've got three speakers today. Patrizia Franco, first of all, she is Associate Director in Activity and Agent-Based Modeling at the Data and Modeling Analytics team at SYSTRA. And she's driving innovation in transport modeling by developing new methodologies for activity-based modeling at large scale, also using big data. Second up will be Martin Campbell. Martin is an associate director in SYSTRA's digital modeling analytics sector, who in the past 20 years has worked on a wide range of modeling platforms and model sizes. He's the strategic and commercial lead for Paramic's microsimulation and sits on SYSTRA's AI steering group. And then thirdly, we've got Alastair Kitson, who focuses in his work on delivering a variety of future transportation and operational ITS projects, ranging from autonomous vehicle feasibility studies to countrywide real-time traffic and emissions simulations and supporting, for example, mobility as a service application. So a range of experiences, a range of ways in which we develop and use models. I'm sure there's a lot for you to talk about once we've had the three speakers talk. So can I hand you the microphone, Patrizia?
Thank you, Tom. Video. Thanks, Tom. Next slides, please, Mark. So what I'm going, when I was invited to this presentation, I want to give you all the information in one slide. And for me, what's next for transport modeling really reflects the paradigm shift that we have faced until now, because we are moving from the predict and provide approach that we had in the past to the ability for us to model for mobility rather than infrastructure. We have a new set of data sources that are becoming available for our models. So we have an increased computational power, especially in the past 10 years. We have seen a surge of what we have seen in the past 20 years. And also we have a new set of problems to solve, which is not they're not able to be solved with the tools that we got at the moment. So we move from an aggregate nature of transport modeling to a disaggregate nature. We need to understand and to provide tools that are able to understand the quality, how we can redistribute space better across users. We move from a car-centric society to a society where we want to rebalance and provide better spaces for all and for all the users and road users. So we need a more user-centric transport planning. We are facing sustainability and climate change issues, which require a road network and transport systems in general that is able to resist and be resilient to the face of flooding, extreme weather events, or any other type of disruption. And we have also the technology advancement linked to the rise in autonomy and connectivity that is coming from both vehicles and infrastructure as well. And at the same time, our models needs to be fit for purpose to monitor and also measure the impacts, which is not just impacts on the economy, but also impact on the society and the environment. So we need different levels. At the same time, the transport modeling sector is facing the blurring the boundaries from other sectors like data science, mathematical modeling, software development. These skills are all the same skills, and we can work together with other adjacent sectors, specifically for developing the transport models of the future. So we see new tools coming in, agent-based modeling, activity-based modeling, digital twin. They're all coming from the integration of various techniques and various modeling tools. And also we have the land use modeling that is also evolving to understand how will change in the future. We require a more system approach to modeling, which means that our models need to be able to integrate and communicate with other type of models like energy modeling, resilience modeling, flood modeling. Every single sector will require the transport points of view as well, which is not something that we have done in the past. But for now, in my speech, I will concentrate on an agent-based and activity-based model to see how we progress in the past 10 years. Next slide, please. And really the need for understanding better travel behavior and demand models comes from the new nascent gig economy and digital new mobility solution that we had. So we move away from single disconnected trips, and we need to represent end-to-end user journey. And we can do that changing the ecosystem that we are going to use. We have the possibility to use a urban environment, which is very rich in data, and also the rural environment, which use other type of data. In any case, the data are not used in isolation. There are new source of data that could complement well what we have used in the past and the surveys, and be collected in a more automated way. What we need to understand and consider when we build agent-based modeling, for example, is that they still integrate with the legacy tools. So they're not cathedral in the desert. So they can integrate, and you got the possibility to use and develop tools that are transferable across region. So once we invest in an agent-based model, these tools can come across different regions. Next slide, please. For example, if we look at activity-based modeling, we really need to build a synthetic population and build travel diaries. So at the moment, we got various pathways to follow if you want to create a travel diaries. You got a more traditional one when you combine census data with the National Travel Survey, or we can use anonymized and aggregated data sets coming from mobile network data. These are data that have been produced for the communication and the marketing sector. So they're not strictly linked to the transport sector, but instead of being a blocker, I've seen that as an opportunity. So I worked for many years with all the network providers that we got in the UK, and the mobile network data can either be aggregated to origin and destination, but also to trip chaining, which are very good aggregation if you want to start to model mobility and the integration of the various mobility services like mobility as a service, for example. You also have a new generation of data coming from the apps. Mobile phone apps can provide GPS tracking data and can be combined with household survey. This is something that SYSTRA is working on at the moment with the Department for Transport to understand the possibility to expand this type of data collection. You also have proximity data, which are the data coming from the cookies on our phone when we decide to accept or not. These are Bluetooth data that can help in understanding better active travel. And of course, we got data coming from intelligent transport systems or all the sensor from the Internet of Things. So there is a richness of data that allows you to work better in understanding travel behavior. For example, in the next slides, I'm showing you the methods that we used when I was at the Catapult to generate digital travel diaries from anonymized and aggregate mobile network data. You start with the raw data and you enrich the trip chaining with land use information. The time of the day, the duration of the trips is something that is also important. You can derive from the mobile network data. And you enrich the trip chaining, providing purpose and mode of travel, understanding which are the various modes. These enable the digital travel diaries to be much richer, to understand the purpose of travel, not just across commuting, education, and shopping, but also to have other purpose of travel as well. Next slide, please. And what are the next examples so that an agent-based model can study? At the moment, agent-based and activity-based modeling are really looking at and could explore the digital technology and the future mobility, understanding the autonomous vehicles, how they integrate with public transport, how they can impact the traffic itself. We can understand better how connectivity will change the traffic flows. So vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure communication can be included into the agent-based modeling modules. And we also look at multimodality, which is one of my favorite use cases, which is really fitting for agent-based modeling. When you start to appreciate the difference, that you are able to use all the social demographic characteristics from the agents to understand equity, behavioral change, how demand will change if we allow certain segments of the population to make different decisions. And this reflects also in the freight as well, because on the same platform you can represent both the movements of people, but actually also the movements of goods, especially using trip chaining deriving from mobile network data. You can see both long-haul logistics and last mile deliveries. And this helps you in understanding the intramodality, how freight and parcels can move around in order for us to minimize road freight. And then the new area, which is something that I'm exploring at the moment, also with collaboration with academia, is looking at the sustainable transport, so the resilience of transport on the face of extreme weather events, but also looking at long-term changes which allow the transport and vehicles that we're using to transition towards alternative fuels and electric vehicles. And this will have a direct impact on the energy modeling, for example. So transport modeling and energy modeling needs to interact. In the next slides, I'm showing you a few examples of what has been developed in the past. This is a mapping model for the northeast of England, where we are testing demand responsive transport, and through an Innovate UK funding called Model. We test different type of research question, which looked at understanding the travel demand, understanding the proportion of active travel, how much can be shifted towards on-demand mobility, and what is the integration with public transport. This is a use case that is using at the most the potential and the benefits in using agent-based with an activity-based approach. So it's merging the two approaches together. And the same approach and tools that you generate for urban areas can also be used for rural areas. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about same rural mobility issues that you might have, the trip chaining that I've used for Bristol in the Northeast, for example, the transferability. So there is not an actual lower availability of data in rural areas. If you enhance the data with the other data sets, you can still have very good information coming from mobile network data, for example, and you got the granularity to understand how mobility services could evolve. In this specific project, we look at demand responsive transport, e-scooters and active travel, and the potential to have e-drones delivering freight. Another possible use case is, if we look at the next slides, please, we have the possibility to integrate agent-based modeling with other type of tools. Emissions modeling and air quality modeling can be integrated with agent-based modeling, allow us to understand the carbon footprints for carbon transition or energy transition. In this specific case, we looked at understanding how last mile deliveries should progress towards electrification or other type of tools, or indeed moving towards other modes of transport like e-cargo bikes, and how the role of mobility hubs could help in facilitating and accelerating the transition towards net zero modes of transport. And the use cases are not limited to these ones. If we look at the next slides, we are focusing on SYSTRA on understanding the connected autonomous vehicles uptake, which can be both from a transport planning point of view, but also from an optimization point of view, understanding behavioral change using the user segmentation coming from the social demographic information from the agents. And what I'm looking to implement is also understanding smart agents, which is at the moment I've not defined yet a cool name for that. But we have static agents in agent-based modeling. We have dynamic agents, so those that they don't have any social demographic characteristics. We usually use curves as dynamic agents in the model, and you can have smart agents. So these are agents that are not just using the generalized cost of transport, but they're also using personal preference to make their decision. And this is the missing bit at the moment. into agent-based and activity-based modeling. So understanding why a person, instead of cycling towards a certain direction, decide to go in another route or another path, because probably you got better landscape, they feel safer, they're traveling with family and young children. So at that point, the agents will be able to have a more realistic representation, which is not just focusing on cost and time savings. And also we have the sustainability that we are developing, looking at energy demand from transport and understanding the phased adoption of electric vehicles, the role of mobility hubs, and also how land use is evolving, and how this evolution will help in the transport system to evolve as well. We also have a land use modeling team in SYSTRA that is working with me. At the moment, I'm talking just about the benefit, but in the next slides, I'm telling you what are the blockers as well. We have an extremely huge computational power available now. Cloud computing is freely, not freely, it is available in a necessary cheap way. We got edge computing that we are testing, and there is an investment coming also from UKRI for understanding the potential of quantum computing. We just had, I think in June, we have the National Quantum Computing Center that is going to be completed in our world campus. This will allow us to use quantum computing also for transport models. So this is something that will be the next step for us in transport modeling. Unfortunately, we have a lack of standardization in methodology worldwide, which is the reason why these webinars are so important for us to understand where other countries are progressing, and there are also communities and associations that are forming in order to develop in a more standardized way activity-based modeling, for example, and agent-based modeling as well. This is an international community rather than working in isolation. And we have the new use cases that requires an holistic approach. So more system thinking, understanding how other sectors can contribute to transport and what might be the impact on the transport systems as well. And also, of course, we have the challenge of real-time optimization and how AI can help us in processing in a quicker way the data. So this is all for me. I'm looking forward to your question. I see they're all coming in the chat.
Thank you, Patrizia. Lots to digest there. I'm allowed one question, and your presentation sort of reminded me that what we're looking for often in models is transferability. Yeah, transferability in time, because we're using our models to forecast the future, but also potentially transferability in space. If we take the relationships that we've estimated in a particular area and we say, well, actually, we can transfer it to another area as well. Do you see the new model forms that you've discussed to actually support that transferability better? There is more detail, but at the same time, that detail may be more transferable in terms of the relationships that we have got at that final level, rather than aggregate relationships that we had in the past.
So all the tools that have been generated in the past for the development of the agent-based model and the activity-based model can be transferred to various geographical areas. We tested 3-4 areas across the UK, Essex, Somerset, Northumberland, the Northeast, and the Southwest, to name but a few. The tools can be transferable as they are, as long as the data input remains the same. So that means using the same format of the data, not the same data for the same geography, because these tools are really strong in understanding the place structure and also the place making. So each model requires tailoring, but all the tools are absolutely transferable as long as we keep the same data formats. And these allow us to reach the same spatial and temporal granularity, because we tested them for both urban and rural environments.
Yeah, thank you. It will be interesting to see how those different rural areas that you were just describing differed, and where they actually were the same when you looked deeper into how the people responded to the differences in place, rather than the people themselves responded in a different way as individual of particular characteristics. I'm sure we can get back to that in a second. I'm going to move to the next speaker, and I'm going to say that's Martin Campbell. Yes, that's right, Martin. I've already introduced you, so please jump in immediately.
Thank you, Tom. Hello, everyone. I just wanted to touch, well, my presentation kind of touches on, maybe the concepts of the future demand modeling, and some of the kind of key sort of emerging themes and challenges that we're going to face, sort of going forward. So, if we go into the next slide, you'll see that I've got three key areas that I think are really fundamental in terms of how we address when it comes to travel demand. I think the first thing to say is there's always change. We've always had technological advances in transport. We've always had different ways of doing these things. So change is, it's not to be feared, but it's changing very rapidly. And I think the modelling world, as well as civilization, I think, is finding it very difficult to keep up. But the three main elements I think that we need to try and address when we're looking at modelling are certainly the technological advances and innovations that are taking place very rapidly. Then the lifestyle changes that they're driving, but also that were present before the pandemic, but are really sort of the long tail of that's now sort of transferring into the rest of our sort of society. And then the third one is the kind of harbingers, the converging crises that seem to be occurring, not just in the UK, but across the world. And then, so given those three, are we actually keeping up with these changes in the way that we actually look at modelling? So on the next slide, I'll go through, on the next three slides, I'll actually go through the various elements and the key sort of takeaways that, I think are important. So Patrizia covered a little bit about this earlier on with the EVs and autonomous vehicles, autonomous networks. So the potential there is a complete paradigm shift in terms of how that works. How the energy networks will facilitate autonomous electric vehicles. Will we all have our own EV, AV? I doubt it. There's probably going to be robo-taxi fleets and things like that. So how do we model that in relationship to sort of the energy networks and things like that? And then the micro-mobility element as well, relatively kind of new technology. How do we model that? How do we model the demand for that, particularly in urban areas, more accurately, or at all at this particular point? And then you have your sort of wider mobility as a service sort of network operations. So that's the first sort of element of the technologies in terms of transport technologies, but behind that's also the digital economy. So we're permanently attached to mobile phones and iPads and laptops now. We can essentially dictate our lives and our transport choices in our hand. So what will that offer us in the future? How easy will it be to integrate mobile phone technology with our lives, with our transport choices? Are we actively looking at that? Do we need to go deeper? And in quantum computing, just around the corner, I've got a little slide later on about Google's Willow quantum computing sort of capability. Computer technology is just progressing so quickly. So where will we be in 5 years' time? Where will the consumer or the transport user be in 5 years' time? So there's a lot of knock-on impacts there that we have to consider, I think, when we're looking at the demand modelling. So the next slide that I've got then looks at some of the lifestyle changes. Now, apologies if this is a little bit small text, but this was something we kind of developed internally when we were thinking about the processes of how does someone decide what they're going to do on a given day. So in this example, our protagonist, Julie, is waking up. She has the option to work from home or the option to go in. She then thinks, right, what will I do today? She may have woken up late. Okay, I'm not going to go into the office. I'm just going to work from home. She may go into the office. She may choose then, okay, I'm running late. Will I just jump on a train? Will I take the car? So you can see the pattern of things that kind of transfer. While she's at work, she's got a meeting. She may have to step out. What mode does she take? How far is the meeting away? How long will the meeting last? Where does she go for lunch? How does she get home? What happens after her day? So the day in the life of a person, multi sort of linked trips together, different purposes, different modes. Are we accurately modelling that at the moment, and how can we potentially do better? And then the third element I was sort of referring to in the next slide is really the converging crises. Now we hear about crises, all the time, climate emergency, housing emergency. But these are key components that are a drag on the economy and society, and they all have implications for transport modelling, because these policies, as I say, don't use the word crisis lightly. It does seem to be an inflection point where this is all coming together and something big needs to be done to deal with that. So the main four I've got there is the climate crisis, so the drive to sort of net zero. How do we accurately, or how do we better model the demand choices people will have as we try and approach net zero by 2040, 2050? Healthcare crisis as well. We've got a chronic mental health crisis, chronic illness, a large sort of percentage population with obesity, addicted to car use, less active travel. It's a drag on the economy. It's a drag on the NHS. Where can transport help in that? How can we encourage people to be more active when we are designing our transport network? So how do we factor that into our demand? And then the housing element as well, lack of affordable housing in the areas required. So how can we deal with that at the land use level to then inform the choices we make when we're looking at transport networks? And then the last one's fiscal. Government money's tight, if non-existent in some departments. Certainly some of the local authorities we speak to at the moment, when we say, oh, we could really do with updating that model. It's like, no, money's a bit tight at the moment. So we need to be conscious of all this, because there are emergent crises, but the money might not necessarily be there from the government. So we need to think about how we can deal with that crisis as well. So on the next slide, excuse me, I just wanted to touch on maybe some of those factors I've kind of hinted at in terms of how we model demand at the moment. I won't go through them all; they're on the screen there. But essentially, are we taking account of the issues that we consider in travel choice? We saw our character Julie earlier on about the amount of different interaction she has with making a travel choice. How well can we model that? How well do we model it at the moment? Can we do better with more data? How do we consider personal circumstances and lifestyles? So, for example, one of the internal projects we're working on, just looking at this at SYSTRA, we interviewed some of our young graduate staff and maybe some older staff, just to get a feel for what their actual biases are regarding transport. And certainly some of the Gen Z staff that we have are adamant they will not own a car. They will live in a place where they don't need a car. They will cycle to work because it fits in with their healthy choices, or they will take the train so they can listen to a podcast. So that utility of time seems to be very important to a certain generation, maybe a certain demographic, maybe less important to some of the older staff who are like, I've got my car, I've been in my car forever, I'm keeping it, I don't care. So those individual sort of personal circumstances, I think, are important. And then just related to that, how do we model it, and can we model that at the moment? Don't really think so. Are we over-reliant on sort of the standard sort of cost factors? Are we taking into account the full range of trips when we're looking at our demand model? Do we have the flexibility there at the moment to do all these things? So food for thought. Welcome your comments on that in the chat. So we move on to the next slide. So does it all matter? I would argue yes. I think transport modelling in general is a very important tool for helping develop future transport solutions. If we can get better data and tools at our disposal, we should use them, because that should allow us to gain a better understanding of how travel choices evolve over time. And maybe we can avoid some of the mistakes of the past that we've made. So on the right is the M8 being constructed right through the city of Glasgow, 1950s and 60s, I think. My dad's particularly unhappy about this because the house he lived in was kind of demolished at that time. So, but you can see how maybe if we have good data, how do we get to more informed choices about what we want to do in the future? So on the future, on the next slide, where are we going to go and where do we think we're going to go? So I've kind of come up with I've stuck to the sort of three main pillars of where I think we go, and I'll sort of go through them on the next couple of slides. So I think net zero and sustainability is going to be the key priority. I think national governments are very, very focused on this at the moment, and it's got a big impact. It'll have a big impact on society, a big impact on transport modelling and planning. So I think we're going to have to increasingly incorporate these factors: emissions, energy consumption, as overriding considerations. How do we transfer to EVs, for example? How do we get that internal combustion engine vehicles off the road? How do we transition to EVs? Where are the charging locations going to be? How do they complement with the energy networks? Are they talking to each other? I'm not sure. I was at an energy conference last week, and there did seem to be a bit of a skew in terms of, oh, we're putting chargers here. Well, why are you putting them there when, so there's a little bit of an imbalance there as well. And then with that, how do we plan all that change going forward to ensure that, we're doing our bit as modelers to try and achieve sort of net zero? And then part of that, I've got a little bit at the bottom there about the focus on localism. It could well be the case that net zero advocates something much more like the 15-minute cities. That could be an emerging strategy from the government. That has huge implications for how we calculate travel demand. So net zero and sustainability, I think, will be priority. The next key element, I think, is, and I think Patrizia covered this as well, I think human-centric and equitable solutions for our future transport networks. So I think there'll be a big focus going forward on social equity, accessibility, and user experience. I think it's a key thing, how we model that. Maybe a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's very key in determining how people, choose, to take a particular mode. How can transport systems better serve marginalised communities? We have all sorts of, demographic areas, wrong side of the track syndrome in particular areas. And I stay in Scotland, we've got the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation. So you can see two areas split completely apart, very close together, but almost worlds apart in terms of the way that they have transport accessibility. So that will be a big focus to, I think, lift people out of poverty, give them accessibility and give them choices. And then doing so, if we can be human-centric and equitable about it, we can allow for the full suite of travel considerations to be included that people consider. So if we get down to that sort of human-centric element, start thinking about the way people want to travel, why they travel, I think that would be a key component of what's going to happen in the future. And the third element, I think, is multimodal and the shared mobility focus. So as I said, I was at an energy conference last week, and there seems to be a perception, certainly not in the transport field, but maybe in the energy field and the EV market, that everyone will just transfer to combustion engine to EV. So there'll be 60 million EVs on the UK road network. And when I said to them, well, that's exceptionally unlikely given the constraints on materials and all the rest of it, there was a little bit of oh, right. So I think shared mobility, how we move forward with mobility as a service is going to be key to fitting in with the sort of net zero goals, but also to addressing some of those other challenges I spoke about earlier on about health and well-being, being active, having the ability to choose, cycles, e-scooters, walking, taking the bus. So modeling all this is going to be a key component going forward, and then linking that in again with the autonomous vehicles element. So they're the three key areas that I've sort of picked out. So on the next slide, I go through how we might do it. There's a couple of slides here. So data, I don't think we've ever had more data than we've got now. It will just continue to be collected. What I really like is that I've put on the Experian persona element there. Really, I kind of like this when we're looking at sort of how do you track individual people in a network. So I think that's a great example of how we can get right down to that sort of detailed persona level and look at how a person who is potentially a country living rural bogue, for example, how will the policy and policy changes, the crises that I've talked about, how will they impact on that particular persona? I think we're getting to the point where that data is available, and I think that will help us sort of inform the choices that we can make. It's not just Experian, there's multiple sort of data sets out there now. It's basically everywhere. Some of it's a little bit expensive at the moment, but going forward into the future, one would hope that kind of comes down a bit. Like with all technology, it improves and it gets cheaper. So I think there's a lot of data there that we can use to help inform some of the things we've been speaking about. And then on the next slide, it's the computing power element, and Patrizia covered this as well. But I think the graph, I just look at the graph on the right-hand side. So this is taken from Google in terms of their over the space of 5 years, you can see the exponential growth in supercomputing power. So the power's there. Maybe it's not completely available to everyone at the moment, but in the future, You know, that's the whole thing. When you break the mold, you do it again, and it becomes cheaper and it becomes more rolled out. So I think we will have the computing power and the data sets that we really need to look at what's happening in the future with regard to travel demand. So my next slide, I just wanted to cover this as well. Is it overkill? I love that bit in Jurassic Park when Jeff Goldblum's character says, "You were so concerned with the could, you never stopped to think about if you should." And I think about that quite a lot within the modelling context at SYSTRA. Do we need the complexity? Can we do this simpler? I would argue in this case that if the data and the computing power is there, we should use it. There are significant issues that are related directly and indirectly to transport use, transport demand. People are looking at us for answers. We are the professionals. Politicians don't know what to do about this. We can maybe give them a steer with some of the kind of new modelling techniques that we can look at. So I'd sort of finish on, look, we have the data and we've got the computing power, we've got the expertise, and I mean we, not just SYSTRA, I mean everyone on the call, and I think we're coming towards a vision now about what we would like to do. So, and on my final slide, I think we have the utopia that might be possible in the future. So thank you all. That's me.
Thanks, Martin. Bit more than 10 minutes, so I can't ask you a question. But hopefully people on the call will type their questions in the Q&A, and there's a lot to work on there. So I'm sure there are some issues that are exercising people's brains. We talked about the future. You showed a nice picture of a future, which reminds me that Lando has also asked me to remind you as an audience that on the 10th of June, there will be a Future 2050 event in London. I think I will be there even. And again, have a look at that. It will be quite an open, challenging event without too much of a fixed agenda, but really trying to understand and to challenge each other on what the issues are that we really need to deal with as transport planners with the future of transport planning and mobility. So I might see you there. And if not, of course, I certainly hope to see you at Modelling World. Let's go to the last speaker, Alastair. Again, you've been introduced, so grab the time.
Hello, hello everybody. I shall try and go through this quickly just to try and get back on track with time a little bit. For those that don't know me, nice to meet you. I'm Alastair, and as an icebreaker, I hope that you like my digital twin, which AI was very kind and gave me a few extra wrinkles. So nice to meet you. In the transport sector, much of the decision making that we undertake relies on static data sources, I think, despite ever increasing availability of data. And this is kind of akin to relying on a printed database full of yesterday's news delivered tomorrow, or perhaps browsing a shop's mail order catalog before making a call to place an order. These are all things that our impatient human nature has mostly made redundant. If I was going to buy a PlayStation, I would check out Argos's stock before making the journey, for example. Traditionally, modelling is also focused on predicting a snapshot of travel patterns without the ability to observe real-time conditions on a large scale. Typically, we would conduct one-day surveys, factor them up, input them into a database, simulate links on flows, output these into another database, then get some kind of dashboard to try and clarify the results. On to the next slide. This discussion will focus on the operational advantages of real-time simulations, or maybe predictive or transport digital twins, as you might know them. It's not a particularly new concept. The Gemini principle document was released in around 2018, and commercially deployed real-time simulations have been around since about 2021 in the UK, and earlier in other parts of the world, as part of advanced traffic management systems, or ATMS, as you might know it. If you're attending this webinar, you might not be familiar with the benefits of operational real-time simulation. So let's just quickly touch on that in the next slide, please. So to differentiate between different types of traditional transport model, to understand where real-time fits in within an ecosystem of strategic and microsimulation and so on. Strategic models are typically used for planning decisions, where microsimulation is typically used for local state, lane-by-lane analysis. Both are often developed in static environments, with updates potentially happening every 3, 5, 10, maybe even 10 years. In contrast, a real-time model, despite a little bit of operational latency, operates with a persistent data feed and tends to run once you got operational 24/7. Its outlook horizon is more immediate, focusing on the next hour, perhaps the next peak, or maybe even a day, rather than 40 years, for example. To illustrate this, I often talk about it's comparable to the weather. Strategic and traditional microsimulation models are like understanding climate patterns, where we predict general trends, such as in the UK, we might expect to have a warmer summer and a colder winter. But with daily variations like whether tomorrow will be sunny or rainy, and which kind of mitigation strategy I might employ, like should I apply my factor 50, are a little bit less predictable. Our weather, which some might say is becoming much more varied than it's used to, could be like our travel patterns, which again could be much more varied than we traditionally might expect. And real-time predictions can help to address some of these fluctuations. And usually they can do it pretty quickly as well, with results in minutes rather than in days. Now, when we discussed presenting this topic, we discussed the art of the possible was really where we were going. And while there's commercially off-the-shelf available products already for real-time simulation, I thought the interesting aspect for me is potentially their integration and their application. But before diving into this, I think we should just quickly discuss the basic architecture of real-time on the next slide. So, counting down anti-clockwise, persistent data feeds are crucial. No system can predict or understand conditions on the ground without being able to detect what's happening on the ground, of course. The more successful deployments have access to real-time data collected at a low latency, typically 1 to 5 minutes, but it could be less. Many UK locations already receive data from traffic management systems, public transport, ANPR, or potentially independent counting devices. And with new above-ground detection products coming onto the market, data is becoming cheaper and more reliable than ever before. Persistent data doesn't really mean sending Bob off down to the outstation to download the monthly logs. It is a continual data feed. The data feeds into the real-time solution, possibly if you've already got an existing data hub or an incident management system, you maybe already have data being fed in the correct latency. Forming the backbone of the predictive system, a digital twin of the traffic network is created, or potentially reused if you've already have one. This is a product which, be careful not to use any brand names, may already emulate your traffic simulation, traffic signal control, your public transport lanes, your road space. Hopefully without too much stochasticity and faster than real-time clock speed. The necessary level of detail will probably include network features like lane closures, roadworks, but excessive detail can, as you might expect, slow down your predictions and potentially obscure your KPIs by adding stochasticity. So on the next slide, we shall explain some of the advantages. To kind of overview, what we probably have now is a dashboard of some kind showing near real-time traffic conditions. We're all used to that type of dashboard these days, but this is one which has a user-accessible database which is always growing with time. While it provides a snapshot of the network and your selected KPIs, the real advantage of the real-time system is its ability to simulate short-term predictions of various scenarios faster than real time, aiding your traffic management decisions. Depending on your data streams, improved situational awareness leading to informed network management could involve adapting traffic signals for construction impacts, advising on active travel based on airtime real-time air quality, for example, or improving bus reliability, maybe even emergency situations. The simulation should help the decision maker to choose the best option by presenting optimal KPIs for what they're trying to achieve. As the data is stored, it creates value, becoming stronger, and we can employ machine learning techniques to get out of forecasting our climate based on one sunny Wednesday in between school holidays, of course, and start to understand the climate better than we ever have. This is again taking things offline and understanding the longer term better. One example could be using historic data collection and integrating it with real condition indicator reporting. And machine learning could potentially, well, I don't know if it could, but it's one thing which we could identify trends in asset defects quicker. So far, we've discussed the capability, existing capabilities rather than potential future possibilities. So to conclude, I would just like to consider in my last final slide how the system could integrate and future mobility could evolve. Now, we've got a high level of technical readiness out there, ready to be integrated. There's new technology coming out all the time, and latency is reducing all the time, and access to data is all coming out, improving all the time. We already know that somewhere around 1.3 mobile phones per head are in the UK, so there's only going to be more data and more access to it. Many places have data collection infrastructure already deployed. That could be through public transport, that could be through micromobility, it could be through contracts with mobile floating car data vendors. And even in our EU, in the EU, the legislation is changing since 2018 with it being mandatory to include eCall, for example, in passenger vehicles. Simple bit of analysis of a single NRTF factor over the past 25 years shows that as modelers, we're actually not too bad at predicting growth, but we still aspire to manage or perhaps reduce trips without adding costly infrastructure, promoting alternatives to car journeys by making shared modes simpler, more accessible, more reliable, cost-effective, that type of thing. As I said, we live in an era already where we have 24/7 access, or most of us have got 24/7 access to real-time information, often basing our decisions on what our mobile phone says or an app says without even questioning whether it's right or wrong. So I suppose what I was wondering towards the end of the presentation was if we could imagine a predictive simulation suite integrated with UTMC. Could we prioritize public transport better by offering minimum green times with adaptive phase control? Could we give buses and trams a boost using our predictions based on demand? Can we imagine predicting a high demand period using the climate technology which I've just explained and verify this with our day-to-day data capture? Destinations like ports, airports, or other places where we experience peaks and troughs in demand, which affects our strategic road network. And can we integrate these predictions with a mobility app or mobility as a service app, offering mixed mode ticketing, perhaps reliable journey times to offer alternatives? And by doing that, could we gain trust and potentially encourage sustainable choices? Now, just to conclude, just a little bit of fun. I was encouraged last week when I was browsing LinkedIn, just to see Mr. Stephen Cragg, Esquire, commenting on LinkedIn that he was very quickly habitualized by web apps, especially in the travel area. So, leaving with that thought, over to Tom to open the discussion. Thank you for listening. And I know that was a bit fast, so if you didn't get it with my Scottish speed, then please just send a question.
It's all right, Alastair. The recording will be made available, and people can play it at a slower speed to be able to catch all those Scottish words. A quick question before we start the Q&A session at 11:30. I mean, you talked about integration, and integration is, of course, the word of the day in the UK. Anyway, at the moment, now, as long as I have worked in modeling, we've tried to integrate short-term predictions, tools, and data for short-term prediction with long-term forecasting. And I don't think we've ever done it particularly well. Now, are you suggesting that this is now possible and desirable? Are you actually suggesting that we're developing digital twins, and maybe more so than ever, we should recognize that these are applications that just require a completely different architecture and a different approach to data and modeling?
I don't think that we're in a situation where it's anything like impossible or difficult, and I think that we are also in a situation where we're getting good results from what it is we're trying to predict. We're in lots of my previous two discussions touched on the availability of computing, and an awful lot of the models and the data which we have access to now is relying on data science techniques to understand patterns, and using these patterns to based on a large amount of data to make the prediction, rather than short-term prediction based on perhaps one day, which I tried to touch on, which I think is potentially where we've come unstuck in the past. I think that there's well, I know that there's tools out there ready to go, not ready to go, but ready to deploy with a little bit of work, which can certainly help improve decision making in the short term.
Yeah, fair point. And I think also that it is perhaps easier for people to understand the benefits that that we can provide through modeling and data science in that short term, and to people's real life experiences. Maybe, I mean, actually, Stephen Craig's example is a good one. On we rely on being able to arrive at the station and buy their ticket whilst we're waiting for our train, rather than having to make a detour. So there are experiences now that people have got that will I think strengthen people's desire to have their real behaviors reflected in those short term in these sort of more operational models, rather than what we have done traditionally in our
the level of expectation is higher as well, because so many things we can do are so immediate now.
Yeah,
being able to take it forward.
Indeed, and that will probably take us to some of the questions that have been asked in the Q&A session as well. So before we go to the Q&A session, one last shout for the survey that Robin Lovelace has asked us to carry out. Please see if you can either scan the QR code or pick up the link in the chat. I'm going to go now to the Q&A, and I think what I'd like Alastair, Patrizia, and Martin to do is A, switch on your cameras, and B, I'm going to ask these questions, and stick your hand up if you feel that you would like to answer that particular one. I'm not going to start with Paul Hout's question about whether ABMs should be called ACBMs or AGBMs. I think they're going to be there probably till it's dark tonight. I'm sure
I know the love for acronyms that you got in the UK, but I don't think you should have longer acronyms. So, Tom?
I think there's probably more important stuff to be talked about. I'm going to start with Josh Zhao's question. And Josh, nice to see you on the call. I'm struggling a little bit with technology here because the question keeps disappearing for me. I'm going to try if I can. So, do we need an agent-based model from a strategic planning perspective, or would more detailed segmentation with conventional model do? And also, if our main concern is trip chains, would actually be adding an activity-based component to the traditional four-stage model be sufficient? I think, Patricia, I'm going to first of all point this question in your direction.
So what was the question? That you got agent-based modeling for transport planning? Yes.
Whether you should, or whether segmentation actually should do an awful lot, and the increased segmentation. And if it's about trip chains, whether
So
adding just an activity-based component to the traditional four-stage model should be sufficient.
I would say it depends on the use case that you want to analyze, because the agent-based model, what it does is basically is an assignment to the agents to the network and see how the agents compete for space and time on the network, on a multimodal network. So it depends really on what you want to analyze, because activity-based model gives you quite a lot. Even the data to build the activity-based model gives you quite a lot on, for example, understanding the type of travel behavior in a certain area, what the people are usually doing, where there are the stumbling blocks, do they travel for longer so they only have a simple tours, or do they adopt a complex travel patterns, as we can see like in rural areas when facilities are far apart, so people tend to combine together different purpose. So when you say, but I really want to have a DRT in rural areas, but then you don't consider the rest of the trips that the people is doing across the entire 24 hours, so then clearly with the activity-based model already tells you that the type of transport systems and services that you put together is not adequate to reply to the type of travel behavior that they got. So in order to change this travel behavior, you need to implement something else. If instead you really need to see an assignment to the network because you need to understand the carbon footprint of the certain services, or how transport is going to change across the years, because you're going to introduce mobility apps, for example, or you want to see how active travel contributes to the mix of the modes of transport, you really need to have an agent-based modeling assignment at that point, because you will be able to see the proportional walking, cycling, private cars and public transport on the same platform. Is really the multimodality that allows you to see everything at the same time. I think that would be my question.
Yeah,
if I understood that correctly. Trip chaining, it's if you want 24 hours understanding of travel behavior.
Yes, I think trip chaining is an interesting question that we need to perhaps address a bit further. Let me pick up another question, and I think this probably can be answered across the three of you, and it comes from Anthony Francis, where it's almost midnight now, I think, Tony. Wouldn't it be a better approach to, especially for long-term forecasting, to use several different and simpler models along with carefully considered interpretation of the output? And it goes back to my original point when I started this webinar. Do we need to make models more complex, or do we actually need to use the models that we've got in a different way, particularly dealing with the uncertainty that we've got in the future? And you've all spoken about futures that don't exist yet and using modeling to try and understand those futures. Do we actually know sufficiently about what those futures might look like to make it worthwhile putting all that detail and effort into representing the details? I'm going to start with you, Martin.
Yep, it's a good question. I've been forecasting now, my modelling kind of career for 20 years. Never quite sure how accurate the forecasts have been, given that we've now exceeded them. So yeah, I think I think traditionally I'm all for keeping it relatively simple, depending on what you're doing, of course. Keeping it simple, because particularly the long scale stuff into the future. I think the more detail going forward 5 years is great. I think once you're going into sort of 20 years, that's a very, very different kettle of fish. So I think scenarios are a very good way to do that. I think sometimes we overcomplicate the scenarios that we do. I personally love the old low, medium, and high type thing. I think it gives you a range. I think the range is what you're looking for. The only caveat I would have with that is I think that, based on my presentation, where I think we're going and what we're going to have to do is going to be complicated. There are so many competing factors. There's energy, there's poverty, there is net zero, there's all of this is impacting transport, all of it's impacting land use. So I think it's a very complicated question that we're being asked, and I think we may have to give it, at the same time we want to give a simple answer, it may be a complicated process to get there. But I totally get it. I totally get that question, Anthony. Yeah.
Alastair, your thoughts?
I was just pondering that through. I was thinking maybe I'm more operational than short-sighted. Maybe that's just how I live my life. I guess the one thing we've probably been reasonably certain of for the last foreseeable past is that population has grown, our general wealth has grown, and our accessibility to wanting to spend more time traveling, spend more time going on holiday, spend more time going to the shops has increased. So chances are our desire to travel is going to continue increasing, like potentially it has done previously. So that goes without saying. So looking at it from the short term, how do we manage that? Maybe that's where more short-term operational predictions can help us to manage the road space we've already got, and try and get us out, try and let us use the infrastructure we've already got more efficiently without building more, I guess, is always the way we try to stop, isn't it?
And let me pick you up on that, because of course this is something that politicians would love to hear. Yeah, we don't have to build more. We can make better use of what we already have. We can probably claim that it was us that made, as the current government, that made that possible. What do you think the message is that we, or the examples are, the work that we have done, that we would have to take to Westminster to actually say, look, you got these very clever transport modelers that could really help you achieve. And we all know, even if it's 1-2% more efficiency, in terms of the value of that, it would be enormous. So what are we doing wrong that we are not heard in that debate?
Interesting, difficult one. Perhaps we are already doing it without realizing. If we've checked our mobility app and seen that our train is late, or our journey into work is going to be very busy because we've got real-time information based on how busy the road's going to be or the train's going to be. So we have already made the decision to use the infrastructure available to us at a different time by starting our journey more early, or perhaps delaying travel to a later time based on the real-time data we've had given to us this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's making people aware that what underlies this is modeling. Yeah.
Well, yes. predicting as much as we can. And all prediction is a model, isn't it? So
absolutely. I think we get sometimes carried away as modelers, unless it's big and heavy and full of data, rather than it is agile. It answers the question quickly. It's still a model.
Keep it quick, keep it simple. That's how I like to do it. Yeah.
Even a spreadsheet with which you prepare the inputs to your complex models is still a model. I'm going to move on to.
I would like to add that probably the best approach is combining two different approaches. So rather than starting to do scenario modeling without any prioritization of the scenarios, combining scenarios with our models, scenario modeling with foresighting as well. So we have a list of preference of what are the possible scenarios that our stakeholder think they might happen, and layer the scenarios. So this is something that you can achieve, starting simple and then combining the scenario and see what happens from the model. Of course, you can't say that you're going to reduce or increase your demand for travel depending on certain factor. I would probably simplify saying you've got the same level of traffic, but at least see what the assumptions are and see what the model will react. So you have this system approach, which is more qualitative, combined with our quantitative approach. And we mostly work into silos, and we don't do much of this experimentation, especially with the forecasting side.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I think, Patrizia, in that we, if we manage to engage with, as you say, the people that are worried about what kind of scenarios might occur in the future, because we need those inputs to be able to provide insights in what those futures would look like in terms of our models, or the way in which you could use the models to either achieve those futures or deal with the impacts of those futures. I think we can encourage that debate, the what if application of models, which certainly in my view is not happening sufficiently. Another, like I said, I'm gonna grab the mic again, and I think there's a really interesting question from Robin North, and one that exercises me as well. It's basically, like, we obviously, when we build models, we look at fitness for purpose, we look at validation, and we use that to convince ourselves and others that the models are, as he says, fit for purpose. What are the challenges, the issues that we need to deal with in terms of these more detailed new modeling approach? We've got activity-based models, agent-based models, and also I think short-term prediction, as particularly Alastair has been talking about. What are the challenges? Can we just stick to the kind of ways in which we've always proven that the models are valid and fit for purpose? Do we need to do things differently? Who wants to grab that? Martin, I haven't heard you for a while.
Yeah, good question from Robin. Yeah, it's the age-old question, isn't it? How do you determine whether the model's fit for purpose? I think part of the issue we have with modeling in general is that there is, just to kind of preface it, there's models are often built for a purpose. We end up using them for something different, and I think that leads us into that, is the model fit for purpose sort of question. So that's kind of first thing. Incorporating the multitude of sort of data that we're talking about here is going to overcomplicate things, and how we then check that and how we then work out whether it's fit for purpose is going to be tricky. Internally, we've thought about, if we were developing something along the lines that I was talking about earlier on, we would want to validate it against maybe an existing 4-stage model to know that the kind of traditional working assumptions are correct, and then almost let it loose on the persona element, or something like that. So I think there are checks that we can do. I think they'll be sufficient up to a point, but we're going to have to devise a new methodology, I think, for doing fit for purpose checks with the new data, for sure. I'm not quite sure what they would be yet, Robin. Happy to work with you on that. I'm sure we'll discuss it in Modeling World.
And yes, it's an interesting challenge. If the models in the aggregate deliver the same kind of meet the same kind of validation checks as we have developed for those aggregate models, is that good enough? It's a start. I agree with you, and I guess it will be also about trying to pull apart some of the processes that are now more detailed underlying those models, and ensuring that there is evidence that those work as intended.
There is also another side. What are the questions that you want to reply, and how much budget you want to use to build those models? Because most of the time people, yes, it's nice to have a large big model, but if you need to test a road scheme which only has a local implication, do you really need to build an agent-based model? Probably not. So using the right model for the right use case is what should be the correct approach to this.
Absolutely. But I think what Martin said is, so often we end up with a model, and now we've got the model, so now we've got the hammer and everything is a nail. And all of a sudden we're faced, is this model also fit for this particular other person? And that question is not often asked or answered in a particularly developed way. So it is a very valid question. I think one that we need to continue to challenge ourselves with. I'm going to give you another challenge from Nick Green. Hi, Nick. And obviously, Nick, your question is about cycling, but it's relevant. So advances in modeling being applied to understand the demand for active travel better. It's obviously that's something that links back to the challenge of reducing car-based travel in the climate change context. But particularly also for me, that cycling is often not an alternative to other modes, but a complement to those modes, obviously, particularly with public transport. So what can we do to actually support that investment in cycling and the understanding of cycling other than an alternative in our mode choice model to public transport, walking or using the car? Don't know who of you wants to pick that up.
I'm happy to make a start on it, Tom.
Okie doke.
Yeah, I think part of it comes down to some of the sort of persona details I was talking about earlier on. Which people have the propensity or desire or the means to cycle as a mode choice. You do see, it's a strategy from the government to increase sort of cycling provision in certain areas. Is that coupled with any sort of modelling at all? Or is it basically, we want 8%, we want 10%, we're going to build it and they will come? I think if you do it the other way, we can use that detailed level of persona information about certain segments of society to say this area in particular or that particular suburb, the opportunities, propensity for cycling is high. We have a relatively kind of healthy, wealthy element there, good accessibility to local workplaces and things like that. So I think we can do much more and tease that out with some of the information that we're starting to gather now to really optimize how we can get that percentage increase of cycling up as a mode rather than maybe just a component part of an overall trip. Thanks.
Either of you, Patrizia or Alastair, I think it's a real opportunity to make a shift in the way in which we support these policies.
As you said before, I don't think that cycling is the only mode that is used for a certain purpose of travel. What I've seen from the data usually is the cycling is just a part, is rather the first and the last mile, and it's combined most of the time, especially with rail. And not all the roads are safe to cycle. Urban areas are equipped with segregated paths that are safer for cyclists. And there are several points of conflicts with car users and other road users that potentially undermine the safety of cyclists themselves. If for the first time in 5 years, we got really good data, which are not necessarily Strava data. The Strava data, for those that don't know, they're using real cyclists, those that are really passionate and they're cycling long distances to build our cycling models. But now we have the possibility to have very good data, especially at short distance. I'm thinking more about the Mobile Nectar data from BT, where you can also see people walking and cycling that are able to provide better insights on who are the cycle users. We have instrumented bikes and sensors that can be used to better define the segmentation of the average cyclists, those that are not cycling just because they're very passionate to cycle, which will help in informing the future active travel model, the active travel models in the future. So better data fit for purpose, but definitely in all the projects that I've seen, active travel is a very good path, especially after 2020, where all the micromobility modes are arrived of our traditional commute or our leisure trips. But it is often combined with other modes of transport, not in isolation.
Yeah, and that's why trip chaining is so important. And I can see the value of activity and agent-based models in that. I'm going to pick up another question, or maybe a point that Tony Francis made, and I'm going to have a request. Next time that I chair a session such as this, could people not answer questions in the Q&A so that I can actually see the question? Paul Spears and Paul Hout. The question and answer session is for us, not for you. You have your chats in the chat, please. So Tony raises the point that he's seen applications, for example, in Canada, where the model is actually used to create a vision, a desirable future, and then afterwards used to try and understand what kind of interventions would be required to get there. And of course, there would be huge value in doing that to help understand whether reducing public transport fares will get us to a future where that kind of mode share that we're looking for will be achieved, or whether we should continue to not raise the fuel duty as has been the case for the past decade at least. So, question to all three of you: do we do this enough, and how do we change our approach to modeling to really use them in this what if development of this is what you should be doing, rather than the other way around? We've got a project, got a policy, and what will be the impact in isolation? I haven't heard from you, Alastair, for a while. Again, it's about the long-term future. Sorry.
I was from a previous experience of doing quite a bit of microsimulation. I always thought that was the power of microsimulation, that you have you make a base model, you represent your horrible, nasty congestion issues or whatever else has gone wrong on your network, and then you that sounded like I'm playing a game. You play with a model to come up with hopefully not schemes which are so crazy you haven't considered the engineering implications of them, but change a lane here, add a lane here, move a roundabout lane around, and you use the tool to solve the problems which you're seeing at a local level. And that was one of the beauties of developing a microsimulation tool. At a wider scale, I might pass over to the other two to comment further.
Okay, Martin.
I love this idea. It's something that we've had a lot of discussions about internally about how we could potentially do something like this. So let's assume, and I'm just reading Anthony's comment there. So yeah, Canada had a vision for the future with measurable goals. Model it. Let's see what it looks like, and then how do we signpost the way to get there? I think that's potentially where we're going with sort of net zero. Modeling a high level sort of strategic goal. This is what we want our network to look like. Model it and make it happen and tell us what we need to do to get there. I really like that idea. I think we can do it. It's very complicated. Again, we'll need to do multiple sort of scenarios and sensitivity tests, but I really, really like the concept of it. And I think it's the one thing that you mentioned earlier on. If you could go to Downing Street and do something, I think that is the big link up, the big think. What do you want it to look like? Right, we'll go away and do it, and we'll tell you what you need to do. I love it. I think it's a great idea.
Cheers, good stuff. Let's do that. Patrizia, I'm going to stop you on that, because I think there's a few more questions that I would like to pick up, and we're starting to run out of time. And I think it's a really interesting set of questions from both Divyesh, Lama, and related a question that Leonie Alpin asked earlier. And it's really about cultural nuances, but also changes in behavior that we are seeing, obviously having occurred since that critical point in time when lockdown happened, where some of the behaviors have shifted in a way that we had not anticipated and seem to be sticking, such as Mondays and Fridays being very different days nowadays from Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, increase in leisure travel, reduction in peak demand, and reduction particularly in commuting demand. So how do we use these new models better to either reflect changes in behavior and these cultural differences, or test what these unknowns, as it were, could mean in terms of possible and even desirable futures? Patrizia, I'm sure you want to talk about activity and agent-based models here.
Yeah, you guessed right. Especially around these, should be country specific. Our models are already country specific because when you have the generalized cost of transport, you build surveys and you ask the people locally. With activity-based modeling, we are going even further because it's not just country specific, but it's also place-based specific. So each area in the UK behaves differently. Most urban, the biggest division is between urban and rural areas, but between the rural areas, what we did not consider in the past was actually how the place was structured itself. So what is the availability of road transport, public transport, what's the land use? And these are all factors that are influencing the way we travel and our actual behavior. So before I say the rural areas, they're behaving the same because they got all complex travel patterns that you can see from their trip chaining, but the changes in travel behavior was not just driven from COVID and the shift towards the new normal, because in rural areas you already had in the past a Tuesday and a Thursday that was different from a Monday and a Friday. These travel patterns have been already implemented before 2019. This means that we avoided to look at a data-driven approach to understand travel behavior, thinking that rural areas were an area where poor data was available, which was not. For the trip chaining, you can see the difference in travel behavior across the 24 hours, of course. What the different behavior according to the segmentation of the person. The social demographic information, your level of income and activities influence the way you travel. So yes, you need to have country specific, and possibly with an agent-based model, they use an activity-based approach. So combining both activity-based and agent-based modeling, you got the possibility to have the nuances of a place-based transport model, which will run specifically with the behavior coming from the people living in those areas, which are not necessarily the same from north to south.
Yeah, and I think just picking that up, and linking it back to the previous discussion about doing what if analyses, we would need to really be willing to test if those groups that we separate out, that we've identified, that we hopefully have surveyed and represent in our models, how these groups may change in the future, rather than assuming that that distribution stays the same, which to some extent is baked into our aggregate models. I'm going to have one more question. We got 2 minutes. I'm sure we're going to be shut down by Lando. There are many more questions, and thank you for putting those in, and apologies if I haven't got around to them. Paul Kirk, quick answer from all three of you, basically says many of our models are built with an answer in mind. And you know what? I get that, Paul. I hear what you say, because many of the models that we are building have come from a background of growth and a background of managing road space. So are we building unbiased models? Deep in our heart, are our models and the data that we use unbiased, or are we still at risk of the models that we're building actually providing the answers that we were expecting in the first place? Patrizia, you can be last. Alastair.
Tying it into an earlier question that perhaps popped up, which was, do we don't have enough reliable count data, and we rely too much on count data when it comes in. I think that we're quite often in a situation when the model gives us the answer that we want, we don't necessarily stringently check it because it's given us the answer we want. Whereas when it gives us an answer we don't want, then that's when we go back and not that I would ever do that, of course. Yeah. But as an industry, potentially where we sit. So handing over.
Honesty, absolutely, and I agree with you, Alastair. So if you feel a bit exposed here, you've got me. I've got your back. Martin?
Yeah, I agree with Alastair, actually. Yes, I think there are biases within the model that comes from the origin of the purpose for the model itself, on many occasions. So yeah, it's just something we need to be conscious about, potentially just do more scenario testing, just to get a range, take that bias out.
And as I think, as Alastair said, be willing to challenge, even if the result is what you were expected. Yeah, why that is, because we are all biased. Yeah, that's of course conscious and conscious. Patrizia, last word.
I would argue that the bias in the model derives from the bias in the data. So if you build the model with a small sample of data, you will carry on all the biases in that data set, and never, even if you got a data-rich environment now, never use the data in isolation and try to use data fusion process in order to enhance the data that you got. If you choose one main source of data, like mobile network data, they're not meant to be used in isolation, like some people believed 5 years ago.
Yep, absolutely. And maybe the next topic I'm looking at SYSTRA should be the future of data. And on that, thank you all three of our speakers. It's been an intense 90 minutes. This is hard work. Thank you for everyone for dialing in. There were more than 200 people originally. We've now dropped off to just over 100. Your questions. And I hope to see you in one of the events that are going to take place soon. And stay in touch. That's it for us.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.